Hello, and welcome back to Storytime here on Build-A-Bear Radio. I'm Victoria, and I'm sitting here with my friend Buddy Bear as we continue our way through the 12 books of Storytime. We're going to start today by hearing from Emerson Weber, who's going to read from her book Sincerely Emerson, which reminds us all to take the time to thank the people who make our lives so wonderful. Hello, Emerson.
Hi, I'm Emerson Weber, the author of Sincerely Emerson, a book about my very true story of how one tiny act of kindness can have a huge impact. Sincerely Emerson is beautifully illustrated by Jaclyn Sinquett and is being published by HarperCollins. My hope is that the book encourages others to express their gratitude with those they love, maybe even their mail carrier. Sincerely Emerson by Emerson Weber, illustrated by Jaclyn Sinquett. Emerson loved writing letters. She loved writing dear. She loved writing sincerely. Most of all, she loved writing everything that came in between. Stories, news, questions, Em put a piece of her life into each one. Her brother's latest games, Taylor Swift's best songs, and her favorite jokes. Why do you never see elephants hiding in trees? Because they're really good at it. Em wasn't done with the letter until it was perfectly decorated, the envelope too. Then she sent her letters out into the world, to friends and family all over. Each letter was a connection. Em's letters made a network of hellos, a network of love. One day, Em got to thinking, there was one person who made it all possible. How come she had never noticed him before? His name was Doug. Every letter that left Em's hands went straight into Doug's. He was always there, every day. No matter what, he kept Em's letters going out into the world. And so Em decided to write Doug his own letter. I'm Emerson. You may know me as the person that lives here that writes a lot of letters and decorated the envelopes. Well, I wanted to thank you for taking my letters and delivering them. You are very important to me. I make people happy with my letters, but you do too. You make it possible. She put it in the box, and she smiled when he took it. The next week, something remarkable happened. Doug got out of his truck, just like he did every day, but this time he had 2 whole boxes full of letters, and they were all for Emerson. You see, Doug had told his friends at the post office all about Em's letter, and they had all told their friends, and soon, Em's letter of thanks had reached nearly every mail carrier in the country. And lots and lots and lots of those mail carriers had written her back. The letters were filled with family, pets, hobbies. They were filled with questions, stories, confessions. They were filled with kindness. One letter said, I work alone in a small rural post office. Another said, I have a son in Kuwait, and if you have a second to send him a letter, he would love it. Every one of the letters was a connection. Every letter had a piece of someone's life in it. With dozens of new pen pals, Em did what she was best at doing. She wrote letters. She wrote the dad, she wrote his son, she sent new jokes, new stories about her life, and she asked lots and lots of questions. And Emerson got to thinking about all those people out there living their lives, working hard, delivering letters, keeping people connected. There was love in their work. And it wasn't just the mail carriers. It was the bus drivers, the grocery store clerks, the trash collectors, and the farmers. There was love in their work too. Every day they got up and they went to work. Every day they did their best. Every day they kept the world going. Millions and billions of people. Every bus ride, every tomato, every bag of trash, every bag of groceries. They were all acts of love. Wrapping the world together in a network, like the biggest hug ever. Emerson wished that everyone she knew would take a moment to notice each one of them and thank them. maybe even thank each other sincerely.
What a lovely story, Emerson. Buddy Bear and I can think of lots of people that we're grateful for, can't we, Buddy? We're going to change gears now, and we're going to hear from Kim Ventrella reading to us from her book, The Secret Life of Sam. There's something pretty amazing that happens in this book, and I'm going to let Kim tell you all about it.
My name is Kim Ventrella, author of the middle grade novel, The Secret Life of Sam. Today I'll be reading from the end of Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. How far would you go to be with the people you love, even after they're gone? That's a question I ask in The Secret Life of Sam. 12-year-old Sam grows up with his pa on the swamps of Louisiana. Right behind their little white house on stilts, they can fish on the swamp, crack open an ice-cold orange crush, and Sam can listen to Pa weave his amazing tall tales. Until right before my novel begins, Sam's life changes forever when his dad dies in a car accident. His world is turned upside down, and Sam is forced to move halfway across the country to live with an aunt he barely knows in a dusty small town called Holler, Oklahoma. Sam hates everything about his new life until a mysterious cat that can sometimes shapeshift into a boy leads him to a tree behind his school. This tree has a huge gaping hollow in the center, and what Sam finds out is that once a day, at the exact moment of Pa's accident, this hollow becomes a portal, and he can use it to travel back home to the swamps to be with Pa once more. All of Pa's stories unravel in beautiful, sinister detail, and Sam is determined that he's going to get Pa back. But then the boy/cat tells him that this portal won't stay open long. Can Sam find a way to rescue his deceased dad? Or will he have to learn the difficult lesson that sometimes loving someone means having to say goodbye? Find out in The Secret Life of Sam. Available anywhere books are sold. We're diving in at the end of Chapter 5. It's Sam's first day of school in Holler, Oklahoma, and a school bully has just destroyed all of his prized possessions, including the model plane, a de Havilland bomber that he built with his dad. It's in pieces, and now Sam is angry and running away from the school toward the mysterious tree. That's when he encounters One Eye, the cat that he's about to find out can sometimes shapeshift into a boy. And this is the very first time that he ventures through the hollow in the tree back to his home in the swamps. So journey along with me and Sam as we begin at the end of Chapter 5 of The Secret Life of Sam. The hot wind cut into his skin. He rounded the side of the ugly gray building, bolting up the hill and over the dead grass, the pieces of his plane clutched so tight he couldn't feel his fingers. He was just running and not caring where he was going, and after a while he stopped and flung the plane as hard as he could. It split into 3 pieces in the air, and then this gray shadow hurtled out of nowhere and attacked the biggest piece. Both the plane and the shadow hit the dirt and rolled, and when they finally settled down again, there was One Eye with a propeller blade clutched in his mouth. His silver eye flashed, lips curling back in a grin, and then he turned and sprinted away. "Get back here," Sam screamed. He ran, even though the plane was already broken, and so who cared? But also he cared. But the cat was running too fast, and then he leaped into the air, and the next thing Sam knew, One Eye had disappeared inside the hollow of that creepy old tree. Gone. Just like that. Sam froze, his face inches from the hole, and a shiver prickled like needles up his back as he saw that the tree wasn't covered in bark anymore, but a thick blanket of shimmery blue and green bodies, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all shifting and flashing their veiny, translucent wings. He stopped breathing and reached his hand into the hole. His fingers didn't touch fur or the rough bark at the back of the tree. They kept going. He reached in farther, even though now the dragonfly wings were brushing his cheek, and he touched wet grass and leaves and something long and spidery that felt an awful lot like Spanish moss. He pulled his hand back and moisture glistened on his fingertips. A warm breeze issued from inside the hole, thawing out his icy skin. It smelled like home. As if on cue, the dragonflies began to peel away from the bark, pouring like an iridescent blue-green wave back into the hollow. Once the last dragonfly had disappeared, Sam allowed himself one final deep breath before climbing headfirst into the gaping, shadowy mouth. Chapter 6. In the darkness, Sam got that feeling again, like he was teetering on the edge of a cliff. He drew in a deep breath, leaned forward, and then he was falling. As he plummeted, dragonflies flitted past in the dark passageway, the frantic beat of their wings tickling his face. Salty sweat stung his eyes, bark scraped his cheeks, and before he knew what was happening, he dropped face first onto a bed of thick leaves. He blinked, head still spinning, and noticed that the leaves were the size of hubcaps, all moist with dew. He found the propeller blade from the de Havilland sitting in a patch of grass and slid it in his pocket. A curtain of Spanish moss brushed his cheek as he turned over to stare into the canopy of a dense forest. It looked familiar somehow, but everything was larger and brighter, and the light streaming through in glittering slants seemed strangely solid, almost like he could reach out and touch it. He rolled over and came face to face with a bullfrog snoozing in a pool of muddy water. Except it wasn't a normal bullfrog. This one was at least as big as a small dog, and it fixed Sam with an irritated glare before hopping away and splattering his shirt with water. All around, the trees and grass and reeds grew twice as tall as normal, and everything was dripping, sparkling water droplets, as if he'd arrived at the tail end of a rainstorm. The air smelled rainy too, and it hung heavy against his skin, just like the humid air back home. Sam sat up and searched the trees for any signs of One-Eye. His whole body tingled head to toe, but whatever questions he had got shut out by the surge of excitement bubbling in his gut. This place didn't just look familiar. These trees might be huge, but they were Tupelo trees, just like in Bayou St. George. And over there, through the tall grass, he could see the green, glassy surface of a swamp. His swamp. At least he thought it was. It had to be. He ran toward old Tired Eyes, crashing through the grass that grew up past his shoulders, moving with such speed that he took a few steps in the water before realizing he'd gone too far. "Can't be," he said out loud. And he didn't even care that there was nobody around to listen, because here it was. There, on the other side of the swamp, sat a tiny white house on stilts, with a wooden dock built out over the water. And that wasn't huge or strange, but normal size, just the way he remembered. And if he squinted, he could see a can of orange crush sitting on the edge of that dock, just where he'd left it. And once he'd settled down long enough to listen, he heard Pa's beer can wind chimes clinking and clanking on the breeze, and it sounded even more beautiful than ever. That tingling coming from deep under his skin grew until his whole body was vibrating, like he had 100 dragonflies motoring away inside his stomach. He took another step into the water and another, and he might have swum the whole way, gators or no gators, if he hadn't noticed Pa's canoe bobbing in the reeds a few feet to his right. It was tied to a stick buried deep in the mud. Sam was reaching over to untether it when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. He spun around, half expecting to find a long, thin shadow towering over him. What he found instead was a boy. "There you are. I must say, it took you long enough." Sunlight sizzled in the boy's eyes, the color of fresh straw, and he fixed Sam with a familiar, crooked grin. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten what time it was. The boy showed off his watch, a Hamilton aviation watch circa 1942. Better head over while you still can. The doorway won't stay open long. He sucked on a blade of grass, drawing it through the gap in his bottom teeth. That was the same gap Pa had gotten from sparring with Bobby Joe's pet raccoon as a toddler. Sam didn't move or breathe. Heck, he didn't even sweat. "You're him." Sam couldn't believe what he was saying, but it was true. The boy looked exactly like Pa from the old pictures in his room, back when he was Sam's age. "Pa? Is that really you?" Words pounded in Sam's head, but none of them did justice to the chaos raging in his brain. The boy laughed, tossing the blade of grass into the air where it arced and caught the light. "Do you like it?" the boy said, running thin fingers over his face. "I can be anyone I want, of course, but I thought this seemed fitting. Anyway, enough chit-chat. Hop in." He patted the edge of the boat, sending water sloshing up the sides. The wood looked shiny and new, like it had just been polished. "You've got a prime opportunity here that most people don't get. I'd hate to see you wasted on me, when you could be with him. You want to go back home, don't you?" Sam still didn't move. He couldn't decide if he was hallucinating or dreaming, but maybe it didn't matter. He was here. Water lapping at his shoes, mosquitoes whispering across his skin. What did it matter if it was real or a dream? He climbed in the canoe. The boy grinned wider, and then he faded away. One second he was there, and the next second his body took on a shimmer, the sunlight cutting in one side and out the other. Then he dropped to the grass, body melting in a cascade of light, and a cat emerged in his place. When I hopped in beside Sam, and the boat lurched suddenly, slicing a smooth path through the sheet of still water. The strange part was that he hadn't found any paddles, yet the canoe moved steadily forward as if guided by an invisible string. But there was no time to wonder about that. Sam's chest swelled as he drew closer to the familiar dock overlooking the water, and the little white house, and the single can of orange crush sitting pristine and untouched, dewdrops rolling down the bright orange aluminum. "Am I really here?" Sam said, peering down at the cat that wasn't a cat. One-Eye cocked his head but didn't answer. As they got closer to the dock, another sound mingled with the dancing leaves and the clinking wind chimes. Whistling. Pa could whistle most any tune, note for note, as long as it had a good twang and was something worth listening to. His favorite was Country Roads by John Denver because he said it reminded him of Mama. As soon as the whistling reached Sam's ears, he could barely stop himself from jumping out and swimming the rest of the way. But soon enough, the canoe bumped gently against the edge of the dock. Excited and confused and shaking something awful, he lifted himself out onto the damp, familiar wood. One-Eye leaped past him, landing like a spider and disappearing around the side of the house. Sam followed the sound of whistling, though now the vibrations coming up from his belly were so strong he found it hard to walk without falling over. It had only been one day, but he already missed the creak of the decking under his feet and the smell of wood that only knew one way to be, and that was wet. He missed it all so much his body ached. He came around to the front of the house, and there, leaning against the porch railing like it was just any ordinary day, was Pa. The real Pa. He was holding the de Havilland bomber in one hand, only now it was shiny and whole, just like the day they put the finishing touches on it out in Pa's workshop. He turned it over in his hands, the fresh paint reflecting back the light. Sam felt in his pocket, but the broken propeller blade was gone. Pa looked up and saw Sam, and the whistle died in his throat. "There you are. About time you showed up," Pa said, and he flashed that familiar crooked smile, except it looked a whole lot better on him than on the other, younger Pa. Sam blinked. He didn't even feel himself moving, but the next thing he knew, he was squeezing Pa's chest, not even caring that his face was smushed into a sweaty armpit. Pa squeezed him back and then finally let go and held Sam out at arm's length. Sam wiped all the wet off his face and rubbed his eyes so he could get a good look at Pa and make sure he wasn't dreaming. But he wasn't, because he could feel Pa and smell him, and so surely that was proof.
Wow, Kim, what an amazing story. I so want to know what happens to Sam and to make sure that he's all right. Buddy Bear and I are going to have to read on to find out. We still have 4 more wonderful books of story time to share with you, but we don't have time to read them today. So it's goodbye from me, Victoria, and goodbye from Buddy Bear. Until next time, here on Build-A-Bear Radio for the 12 books of story time. Goodbye.